Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. And before we get into breaking down this week's position group, I want to get into what happened on Saturday night. And the reason why I want to get in what happened this Saturday night is we probably witnessed the biggest meltdown on a national stage since arguably 28-3. Typically, when you have a 5-point lead with less than 30 seconds to go, it's pretty much a sure dub unless you are the Duke Blue Devils. And as a Carolina, Chapel Hill, Sky Blue team, I am not a big fan of Duke, and they kind of puked on themselves there at the end there.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch, right? I thought because the other game was before that. I watched most of Florida Auburn, but at a certain point, I was like, all right, Duke's got this in the bag. They got Houston, and I just kind of put it off to the side. I wasn't really focused on it, but then Houston started clawing their way back, and then eventually, like you're saying, Duke can't inbound the ball, which is something like so obvious. It's one of the most basic things that I don't know if you ever played like organized basketball or like a rec league or anything, but like the very first thing you practice outside of like doing layup lines or the 3-man weave to start practice is you learn 1 to like 3 inbounds plays. And they're like really basic things, like you can set a pick for a guy, or some people run this way, some people run that way. Duke couldn't figure that out, which is so fundamental, so basic that elementary schoolers can figure it out. And eventually, Houston ended up getting the win off of that. Cooper Flagg had an over the back foul, which gave Houston the free throws to take the lead, and then Cooper Flagg, this like triumphant prospect, missed the potential game tying shot. Really funny to see. I'm not a Duke fan either, so it was quite fun to see. And then, like you're saying, on a national stage, probably the biggest. On a lesser stage, I think back to the Colts and Vikings game. That was a pretty big choke where the Colts were up, like 35-3 or something, and the Vikings came back. That was pretty bad, but this one was even worse because I think you could make the case that this is the most talented Duke team in at least decades of play. You can go back to the Zion year, but this group had, I think, a higher overall like recruitment ranking like per player than the Zion team did, which was also a stacked team, which also lost in the Final Four. I think it was to Michigan State that year. But it's just funny to see.
It is. No, and to tie it in, a blue blood school that obviously has a lot of history, has won a lot of championships, has gotten to these big moments and big stages before. To kind of bring it back and tie it into today's episode, we're going to be talking about the linebacker position and the Panthers. Our organization has a long legacy at that position. When you talk about Hall of Fame caliber guys, guys that have Pro Bowls, all pros to their names. I mean, you go back to Sam Mills, obviously, who started it, but Dan Morgan for that first Super Bowl run, who's now the general manager. I mean, his story and circle has kind of come full at this point. And then you look at guys like John Beeson, Thomas Davis, Luke Kuechly, heck, even Shaq Thompson, who just got cut from the team. And it seems like since that guard in the 2010s, we really haven't had a dude there. And I don't know if necessarily this is the draft to get that dude. But when we talk about these linebacker prospects today, I think this is one of the positions where it is a little lackluster. And because of that, I think a lot of teams that had some of these more high priority free agent linebackers didn't let them leave the building. We saw Ernest Jones stay in Seattle. We saw a couple other linebackers get extended and kind of stay in their place. And so to turn it over to you, Jacob, is that your feeling on this draft class? Is this is a weaker group than what we typically see from this position?
For sure. Just trying to go through and watch linebackers like for the draft, for the big board, and then for today's episode, you're left wondering after the first 5 or so guys, like, who would I even want on my team, right? You have the obvious guys at the top of the draft, Jihad Campbell from Alabama, Jalen Walker from Georgia. Is he an edge? Is he a stand-up off-ball linebacker? That's a discussion we'll have here shortly. But then after that, 2 or 3 other guys that you could feel good about adding on day 2, and then after that, it's just really bereft of high-end talent. And with linebackers, right? It's kind of like the boring position on defense, right? Kind of like how tight ends are maybe the boring position on offense. They have to do everything, right? Tight ends have to block in the run game, pass game, go out and catch. Which it's interesting. The Panthers actually signed a tight end who's actually, you want to bring it back to Duke, is actually a basketball player from Coastal Carolina, converted to tight end, I believe, like a month after his season ended. He was just playing basketball a month ago. And because he was 5 years removed from when he left high school, the Panthers were technically able to sign him before the draft. So he counted as a 30 visit, but it's one of those weird sign one of these guys that wasn't in the NFL draft pool like immediately. So if you want to talk about winning the draft already, we got an extra pick if that's the direction you want to go in. But then on the flip side of the ball,
it's a camp body. I love how everybody's like acting like this guy's going to be Gronk at 6'9", whatever he weighs in at, and he looks very agile. And I'm hoping the best for him. I think a lot of people are getting really hyped about this guy.
I'm getting hyped. I don't think he's going to be Gronk. That'd be cool if he was, but I think he's going to be a practice squad guy. I think at minimum. Number one, with him being added to the team, we only have 3 tight ends still. So they still have to address that position, draft, maybe UDFA depth, that kind of thing. Number 2, if you go back to, I think it was 2016, Dan Morgan, Dave Canales, and a couple of the other people on the Panthers staff were with Seattle when they did a similar thing with George Fant, who was an undrafted guy who went on to have a pretty decent career as an O lineman. So maybe if they snipe this guy, I'm going to like applaud the scouting staff all the more, because this could be a similar thing there. But he could also be a guy who has 2 left feet or something, or can't get off press. You never know. Like it's a hard transition from basketball to football in general. But the point I wanted to make to tie that into linebacker is it's kind of the mirror position on the defensive side of the ball. Linebackers have to run fit, like they have to stand and come down, hit the running back. They have to go after the quarterback sometimes on blitzes, like with Jalen Walker. He played edge part-time, moonlighted as an edge, and they have to drop into coverage. So while it might be the boring position, it's one of the most impactful. It's the middle line of the defense. And for the Panthers in particular, it's been the position that's really led our defense throughout our franchise's entire history. Talking about Sam Mills to Dan Morgan to Kuechly, and now we're kind of left wondering who that next guy is. Hopefully, we can get that next guy in the draft, but I think there's probably maybe 1 or 2 candidates that can fit that bill and even live up to somebody like Shaq Thompson's performance on the Panthers during his better years.
Absolutely. And it would be guys, I think, within the 3 to 5 range that we're talking about. We have a couple visits with some of these players. I think this is a good time to segue into, I think, who is clearly the definitive number 1 linebacker in this class, no matter who, like where you want to fit number 2 at. And we'll get to Jalen Walker in a second. But Jihad Campbell out of Alabama, I mean, this guy's 6'2", 235. Very long, very fluid. The closing burst he has is extraordinary. We're talking about a guy that has outstanding zone coverage IQ, ferocious tackler. And he's a guy that, as much as everybody wants to talk about Jalen Walker, and I think his pressure rate numbers are a little bit better than Jihad Campbell's, Jihad Campbell can rush the passer too. This is a guy that you want to use a running back to block him. Like you better get somebody else. You better get a tight end. You better get a lineman on him, because he will make you pay in some of those instances. And I think we'll talk about his weaknesses, but there's just so much to love about this long, rangy linebacker that really does remind me of CJ Mosley about a decade ago.
Yeah, and you bring up the edge rushing stuff, right? And not to keep talking about Jalen Walker prematurely, but Jihad Campbell kind of mirrors the Micah Parsons route in terms of experience. Both high school edge rushers that at the college level had to be converted to interior. One, because, or for Parsons, Penn State needs their interior linebackers. They're like the linebacker school. Like they're the number 1 linebacker producing school probably ever. And then in Alabama's case, Campbell was recruited as an edge rusher, but had Will Anderson on one side, Dallas Turner on the other, and then a slew of backups in between, like Chris Braswell got drafted, I believe, in the 2nd round last year. Q Robinson is going to get drafted this year. So Nick Saban, who was the head coach at the time, said, we got to get this guy on the field. let's move him to the middle. And then even as a freshman, he's been playing middle linebacker. He has the pass rush chops, even though he's not necessarily the 250 to 260 pounds that you want. And I think the team that drafts him could explore him rushing more, like from the outside. But even as a stand-up linebacker, I think he's incredible. I think you hit on all the high points. My main thing, or my biggest thing with him, is his lateral movement speed, sideline to sideline. One of the best in college, maybe the best in college football, and one of the best in recent memory for a draft prospect. If you want to get into the weaknesses, I think his decision making can improve just a tick, especially in coming down when he's fitting the run, like the angles he takes. I think if he decides a little bit quicker, he can end up with more tackles for loss than he already gets. But I really think that this is one of the most complete linebackers we've seen in quite some time. And he ended up in my top 10 players because I think after like 6 or 7, there's quite the drop off. But I really wouldn't mind if a team takes him early in round 1. One of the biggest hangups with him, however, and I think it's going to push him down the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if he's taking day 2. He's reported to have or need labrum surgery, which is like your shoulder right here on your back. And it usually requires a 5 to 6 month recovery time for the surgery he's having. So he can miss the entire offseason program and sometime even into the season, similarly to Jonathan Brooks, although shoulder isn't necessarily as impactful as a knee ligament for a running back, But I think if teams aren't 100% convicted on his medicals, then I think we could see a slide with him. But I think he's absolutely worth consideration for the top half of round 1.
Absolutely. And to your point about just being a tick faster in the run game, I don't know if it's being necessarily a tick faster because you see the play recognition, especially in the passing game. For me, it's just not being passive, not letting linemen or some of these blockers get to the second level to beat them to it and not just let the play come to you. I think that's the big thing, really, him taking a step in the run game. And then in the pass game, just being able to mirror guys a little bit more in man coverage, because I think a lot of his great traits, like you said, is that sideline to sideline movement, is playing in zone, dropping the certain spots, just having a really good awareness of what's going on in the field. And like you said, I think if we're going to talk about anybody potentially making the transition from linebacker to edge, I think his measurements actually favor a little bit better than Jalen Walker. I think he's a little bit more bigger, a little bit more physical. Maybe he doesn't have the pass rushing snaps or some of the presence off the edge that I think people are anticipating Jalen Walker to bring. But I think this is a good segue to talk about him, because I think the biggest difference I see between the two, outside of just a little bit of drop in physicality and obviously some questions if Jalen Walker can be the linebacker Jahad Campbell and some of these other prospects are, is with Jalen Walker it's his leadership. And you hear about it all the time with all the other players in the Georgia locker room. You're hearing about it all this offseason. And to me, it's that high plus, just he is the vocal leader on and off the field. And sometimes when we talk about these prospects, we're gauging what we're going to see on Sunday. And I think a lot of times these teams are prioritizing what they get throughout the week. So we've seen a guy like Luther Burton fall down boards. And what's the big thing that's coming out about him? He wasn't anything special Monday through Friday. He wasn't a guy that was putting in the work at practice with Mizzou. And that's probably going to turn off a lot of teams that are really going to prioritize what goes on between Monday and Friday, 52 weeks out of the year, rather than just 17, 18 games that happen every Sunday. And so I think that is going to be kind of the difference maker with watching Jalen Walker rise, is because everybody is in love with what's off the field, and people are starting to get to know that a little bit more through this draft process.
For sure. And I think it's hard to see that kind of stuff on tape most of the time about how you can be a vocal leader, rally your team, that kind of thing. You can see that on the tape with Jalen Walker. Like, you see him going up behind his guys, like patting them on the back, pointing out routes that they can get between linemen, recognizing stuff there. I don't want to put him in the same stratosphere as Kuechly, because Luke Kuechly was unique in that regard in his preparation, but he was very similar in that way. Like, he would call out plays, he would tell his fellow players their designate or like their assignments, and you see a little bit of that with Jalen Walker. Again, not to Kuechly's level. I don't want to blaspheme here, but it's easy to see why teams are falling in love with the person off the field, like the Monday through, I guess it would be Monday through Saturday once he's in the league. And then when it gets to Sundays, he's still a really good player, right? When we talk about edge rusher versus linebacker, I want to touch on the edge rusher parts a little bit first. I think he's plenty violent. Like, I think his arms and hands routinely move to counter and chop linemen. I think he has the speed necessary off the edge. Good like initial burst and acceleration. I think he has. And overall, I think looking at the explosive part of the position, I think he has that down. When it comes to being an edge rusher in the league, though, you got to talk about the frame. Like, he's 20th and below percentile on all your basic measurable stuff, like height, hand size, that kind of thing. And I don't think he has elite bend either, which could help make up for that. But when we moved him to linebacker, or when you want to talk about him being a linebacker prospect, you can see the physicality that he fights with O-linemen. You can see him fitting the run, like shooting down and going after the running back. You can see him wrapping up and tackling hard. You can see him recognizing
what position is
plays
that from?
before.
What position is that from?
That's from the linebacker spot. That's what we're talking.
Yeah.
That's when he's
I know.
behind.
I want people to hear this because,
Right.
again, like some of his better traits that everybody think is going to translate to the edge position is really from that outside linebacker position.
Right. And I don't think he's going to be a Mike line, like a middle linebacker. I think he's more used probably on the weak side, if I had to guess, would be his best spot. But he can certainly fly around space, come down, hit hard. But then you get into some of the things like the instincts that linebackers require. This is where Jihad Campbell separates himself from Jalen Walker. I don't think Walker has those instincts necessarily. I don't think he can be a high-end coverage player. Maybe in the short area, he'll be fine in coverage just because he's athletic enough. But when we get into the intermediate and deep coverage, kind of similar concerns that you have with Jihad Campbell, I don't really see Walker being that kind of guy. But his ability to wreck plays and to even if he recognizes them late, get to them on time and in a hurry. I think that's the tantalizing thing about him, right? And because he's such an explosive athlete, even if you are like me and you convince yourself that he can't be a full-time edge, he can be. I know the comp is Frankie Louvu that people are throwing out, like he can be the weak side or strong side. Louvu lines up a lot on the strong side. One of those linebackers who blitzes a lot and gets after the QB, but can also do the linebacker things. That's really like the vision I have for Walker. I when you look at a lot of his edge tape, it's like him lining up outside of another edge rusher like Michael Williams, who's going to get drafted in round 1-2. But I really think a transition to stand-up linebacker with the occasional pass rush rep or blitz is going to benefit Walker in the long run than just having him try to be a full-time edge rusher. And the last thing I'll say in that regard is this graphic that you have up here where it shows the havoc rate for players versus their kind of like how big and strong they are, like in terms of measurables and stuff like that. You'll notice somebody that's grayed out if you're watching on YouTube, not grayed out, but like faded out because they're a past draft prospect. Devin Lloyd from Utah, pretty similar profile. I think Walker is a lot more explosive, but what Lloyd did at Utah versus what Walker did at Georgia, I think is quite similar. Somebody who is a stand-up linebacker that would line up on the outside and rush from the edge quite a bit. And we see Devin Lloyd go like 24 or something to the Jaguars in his draft year. He was my linebacker 1 that year. That was the same class as Nakobe Dean and all those guys. I think Jalen Walker is going to end up in a similar role to what Lloyd is in the league. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he's a more explosive version of that. And if all the stuff off the field, like the positive stuff off the field matches up, then there should be no question why teams are looking at him as a top 10 player. Like if he's this like super, like I don't want to say like golden player, like golden boy or something, but like somebody who's uplifts everybody, natural leader, and has the athletic traits to be an NFL player. That's the tantalizing part of it. But then when you get into the tweener aspect, for me, it's like, can you fit a tweener in the top 10? And that's my biggest hesitation with it.
You see, if Evero was cut from like Todd Bowles, and what I mean by that is kind of the exotic blitz packages, or maybe even a Mike McDonald where it's simulated pressures, where you're sending guys from different spots. And one thing that we do need to talk about with Jalen Walker, because people do want to bring up from like an advanced statistics standpoint, okay, he has a higher pressure rate than Jihad Campbell or some of these other linebackers. You see the aggressive hands. You think some of this is going to translate. A lot of those pressures are coming from the A-gap. Like you said, a Frankie Louvu type role from that outside linebacker. But getting back to the point where I think he's best fit is like, hey, on early downs where you're expecting the run, he needs to be that outside linebacker, because for a linebacker, he's got decent size. He's actually got long arms for a linebacker. But then when you start comping him to a traditional edge, he's extremely small. And so you don't want him on the defensive line in those instances. But on third downs, on those money downs where the quarterback's going to be dropping back to pass, that's where it's okay. He gets on the line and you drop somebody else back. But again, Ejiro Evero isn't somebody that's like designing these exotic looks. And because of that, that's where I struggle to see his fit in Carolina outside of just being a leader. Because otherwise, it comes down to a point where he starts looking like a Devin Lloyd or some of these tweener players where it's like, does it really work? Like everybody's trying to find that next Micah Parsons. And I get he's a similar weight. He's got longer arms, but he's got smaller hands. And he's not as tall as Parsons. And Parsons is a liability in the run game. And again, that is the biggest concern coming away from last year, is we couldn't stop the run. So again, I'm just really confused by Carolina's like enamoration with this prospect. Does he seem like a great guy? Absolutely. But unless you think you're trading back to the teens, that there's a team that's trying to jump up and grab a premier blue chip talent before they're all gone, I just don't see how you can justify taking him. And it's not just the Panthers. I mean, there's some rumors going around that this guy could go before Carolina picks at 8. And I'm just, because of those tweener elements, really hung up like you, that this isn't a guy that may not be able to transition as smoothly to the next level.
Yeah, I think it's easy to find why the Panthers love him, right? We're trying to build a culture, right? That's why we extended a guy like Chuba Hubbard. A lot of the stuff, that's why Robert Hunt was brought in. He's a dog. He's the person that Dan Morgan wants. That's who Jalen Walker is. And not just because he is literally a Georgia Bulldog. But I think what you're trying to say, and I have a similar point when it comes to Walker, he's kind of a luxury pick for the front seven. And what I mean by that is, I don't think that he's ever going to be a premier number one pass rush guy. The only similar size guy that's done that is Micah Parsons, right? And Parsons landed in a spot with a defensive coordinator who knows how to extract the most out of his players on an individual basis. The reason we talk about the Cowboys winning 13 games in a row for, 3 years in a row? We talk all about how good Dak is, how good CeeDee Lamb is. The defense, like back-to-back, led the league in turnovers, which never happens because of variance. And then a year later, or like the last year Dan Quinn was there, they were like 8th in turnovers. So automatically they go for the ball. They didn't give up super nuclear plays outside of Trayvon Diggs. But a player like Dan Quinn, or not a player, excuse me, a coordinator, a coach like Quinn was able to get the most out of Parsons. And then where did Frankie Louvu go this offseason? To Dan Quinn, who got the most out of him and turned him into an all-pro after he had a decent run in Carolina for a couple years. But the comps of Frankie Louvu and Andrew Van Ginkel, I think, is a very similar player to Walker. I think Walker's probably a bit bigger, more explosive.
And Brian Flores, creative play caller. Like,
creative,
but we
don't
have that in Carolina. Like,
it's not just that. I think Evero deserves a bit more credit with what he had to work with last year. But when you look at Andrew Van Ginkel, who I think came from Miami where he had familiarity with Flores, so long tenure there, but he was like a 5th round pick. Frankie Louvu was an undrafted free agent. And then you look at some of these other tweeners that go early in the first round. You see a guy like Isaiah Simmons, who also went 8th overall, right? Isaiah Simmons was they didn't do like similar things because Simmons was like a safety linebacker. He was exponentially better than Jalen Walker was in college. Like Isaiah Simmons was a top 2 or 3 player during his years at Clemson. And then he makes it to the league with a team that already has a bad defense and can't really find a spot for him. And then he flames out his first couple years. Revived his career once he made it to the New York Giants, right? But like it's hard to do that. And then again, the Cardinals, Hassan Reddick, tweener from Temple. He never figured it out there until he came to Carolina and reunited with his old coach, Matt Rule, his old coach, Phil Snow, who knew how to use him. The Cardinals, again, Zaven Collins, I think it was the year after they took Isaiah Simmons. Still didn't figure it out with him. Jury's still out on him. Then you look at Washington, who did a similar thing with Jamin Davis from, I want to say, Kentucky at the time. Didn't work out too well. He was another one of the Rivera first-round picks that is no longer with the team. I think he's on a team that's up north, like the Vikings or something. Either way, when you're looking at like tweener profiles, even if they're elite at the college level, I think you have to hesitate when you're pushing them into the top 10. Yeah, like it's hard, but and it's kind of like the quarterback thing too, right? When you have a quarterback that goes in the top 10, they're going to go to a bad team, so, like usually, right? Or a bad offense usually. And sometimes they struggle early because they have a bunch, I don't want to call them bums because they're NFL players, but they have a bunch of not good NFL players around them. If Jalen Walker goes to a team that doesn't have a good defense, can you count on someone who is 6'1", has undersized hands, has undersized arms at the edge rusher position to be the number one edge rusher for your team that's trying to rebuild, like the Panthers, right? I think if we took him at 8th overall, us as a fan base would want him to be the number one edge rusher. Can he outproduce Clowney or Patrick Jones or DJ Wonnum, who are all pretty good run defenders because of their size, and who, while they may not have the juice that Walker has, have the length and the technique to get around NFL linemen? I think if we're taking Jalen Walker in the top 10, we as Panthers fans are like, this guy needs to get 10 sacks. And I just don't think he's going to be a 10-sack guy in the NFL unless he's used in a, I don't want to say gimmicky because that can lessen his impact, but in a way where he can do multiple things, rush from the middle, blitzes, the occasional edge rushing snap. That's the path forward for Walker as an edge. And so when you walk it back and say, oh, he could be a serviceable stand-up linebacker too, I think that's where his real value is. And he's still worth a first rounder in that regard. To me, it's just not top 10 in the way that people are talking about.
No, you want a true traditional edge, or you're going to want to get value somewhere else with a top 10 pick, in my opinion. I think it's a little too rich for a guy that I don't think has a clear definitive role at the next level. And like you said, there are so many examples of these tweener players not working out. And Micah Parsons was not initially drafted, or at least the national media did not have this like idea that he was going to be a pass rusher.
Right.
Like that happened because of injuries on that Cowboys team. And he was like, hey, let's do this. And Dan Quinn, being innovative, was able to figure this out. And the only reason I'm going to hesitate, because I know you were trying to defend Evero, is we saw Evero when he had Brian Burns, Hassan Reddick, Frankie Louvu, when you had some of these premier talents, and he didn't get them to the heights that some of these other coaches are getting these players to. And so that does give me a little bit of hesitation that you now add a guy that I don't think is just clearly dominant at one position or another. It gets really scary because that's a lot to invest in a player with so many question marks. So with that being said,
and real quick to that point, I think if you take Walker in the top 10, you need to extract the 90th percentile outcome out of him for it to be worth it. And to your credit, I'm not sure Ejiro Evero is capable of doing that. I think that's going to go more toward the creative rusher type of coordinators, like Todd Bowles, like Flores, like Dan Quinn. But unfortunately for them, I just don't see any way Jalen Walker is going to make it to them. If I had to like lay out his range as it is right now, I think Atlanta or Arizona is kind of the floor there, which would be ironic because Atlanta never takes Georgia players. So maybe he makes it one down to Arizona, but I think he's going to go high. It's just I can't at this moment in time, I can't see the path forward for myself if I'm putting my mind into the Panthers. Like, where can I use this guy to where he'll have a top 10 impact?
Absolutely. But I will say I'm not a big fan of necessarily the list of guys the Panthers are interviewing for potentially that pick 8 or a trade back spot. Like the only guys that get me excited are Tet McMillan and Walter Nolan. I haven't done a lot of research, and we'll talk more about the Boston College edge rusher on Thursday. But again, it's just the Panthers' direction they want to take with this. And then what we have seen from a prototype edge rusher, they want a bigger guy. So the guy out of Old Miss, Princely, that may be a flyer we take.
Michael Williams, Jalen Walker's teammate, has that prototypical size. And I think a lot of Panthers fans are setting themselves up for disappointment because they've kind of locked in onto Jalen Walker and kind of disregard Williams. But I actually think Michael Williams has a higher ceiling just because of his size. I think he would fit this team better. So I'm not going to be disappointed if he's the pick at 8. And I just offer a warning to other Panthers fans. Like, I think this guy could fit the team a lot better than a guy like Jalen Walker could.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we'll get more into that Thursday. I agree with you that Mikael Williams, I would much, even though I don't want him at pick 8, I would much prefer him at pick 8 over Jalen Walker because of again, the defined role and the ceiling of him as a player, I don't feel is capped nearly as much with a guy like Jalen Walker. But the next 3 guys that we're going to talk about, I won't say all of them are more undersized, but these are guys that are better in pass coverage, which again, at the NFL level is very important for your linebackers to do. To not only be physical in the run game, know what's going on there, but to be viable options for covering guys on the back end. So the first guy that will kick it off, he was just announced, I think today or yesterday, that he has a team visit.
He's here today in
he is.
In
He's in the building. Yep. So UCLA linebacker. A lot to love about his game. I mean, when you look at probably the top 20 linebackers, he's top 10 in terms of like havoc or disruption in his senior season. This was a guy that got after it. What I will say, he's willing in the run game and he's very knowledgeable. You see where like he can diagnose quickly and get to where the ball is going. But there's a couple plays a game where he gets knocked back on his butt. And the reason why is he's one of those more undersized guys. I think he was playing around 225 pounds. I would like to see him put on at least 10 more pounds getting to the next level. Just be a little bit bigger so you aren't getting bodied by some of these bigger players at the next level. But from a coverage standpoint, there's a lot to like about his game. And again, flies around, makes plays, creates havoc, stuff that you like to see from the position.
Yeah, I think he's a top 3 coverage linebacker in this class. I was looking at my board and he comes in at 35. I have a good opinion on, I think it's Swessinger is how you say it. Excellent vision, right? You talk about he is willing in the run game. I think how he mitigates how he's like struggling with size and physicality, he's able to slip and avoid blockers quite well. We talked about how with Jihad Campbell, that could be his step to being a superstar is like slipping and avoiding more than just taking on a gap. Carson is good at that from UCLA. I think he has good ball skills and coverage. He had a couple wild interceptions this past season, pretty rangy on that back end. And as a tackler, I think he gets the ball carrier on the ground. It's just like you're saying, fighting through those blocks, dealing with somebody like if Ashton Genty were to come up to him, Ashton Genty's bouncing off of him, right? And so once you get to the league, that's probably your top 8 running backs, right, are going through or bouncing off of a guy like that. I also think he's more of a traditional linebacker in the sense that I don't think there's a lot of value as a blitzer there just because of that physicality. I don't think he's super explosive either. And then despite his range, I think he can get caught in space sometimes in coverage. I don't think he has the high-end speed to make up for it. But like instinct, intangibles, and vision, I think are the big selling points in Swessinger as being a good all-around linebacker that, yeah, you could add probably 10 to 15 pounds to him. He could, if you get him with your training staff, you could probably get a tick faster. And I think that's somebody to be excited about. Obviously, the Panthers are excited because he is one of the 2 linebackers reported so far on 30 visits. The other being Shamar James from Florida, who's going to be toward the back half of the draft, I would say. But for these top 3 guys, I certainly like Swessinger in coverage, like as a good all-around linebacker.
I mean, the guy executes robot to perfection, which is your ability to rotate and kind of pursue an area of the field, either like a deep curl or a crossing route that's coming over top. And he does a really good job at this. And another linebacker we're going to talk about shortly also does that. But that's something that you want to like look for in a linebacker. Like how quickly can you like flip your hips, get back to where you need to after defending the run. And I love to see that. And like you said, it has the knowledge, the know-how of where the ball is going to kind of slip past tackle blockers. And I just want to see a little bit more weight on the guy. And I think that's definitely possible. He reminds me a lot of like Terrell Bernard with the Bills. This is a guy that I think is great in coverage, will fit a system that wants to be a nickel a lot. And as long as he's able to, with the next staff, put on a little bit more weight, like he is going to be a good player at the next level that will probably be borderline Pro Bowl level, depending on kind of just the linebacker play across the league. But he is going to be a really good starter for years to come.
Yeah, plus starter ceiling for sure. Did you want to go to Demetrius Knight next from
I
South
think,
Carolina?
yeah, like when I
Yeah.
was talking about that robot, he's the other guy I was talking about. He's also really good, just like
Hmm.
fundamentally at tackling. And then just, he's very well disciplined. I think this is a guy to like. And I think he also actually, we had a local visit, not a 30
Hmm.
visit with him down at South Carolina. Definitely would be a guy to look at pick 57.
For sure. Played at Charlotte, where we're both alumni, excuse me, of Charlotte. So always love 49ers getting into the league. Demetrius Knight is your classic thick neck run fitter, right? He's like you're saying, he's good with the robot, be able to disengage and get after the receiver. But this guy crashes down, gets off of blocks well, and comes down and thumps the running back. And while I think Trevin Wallace can project into that because I think he's athletic, I don't think we have that kind of guy on our team right now. So, like you're saying, pick 57, I think would be quite good for Knight. I think he lacks top end speed. So if he's going to go against somebody like a Dylan Sampson, the running back from Tennessee, or like somebody projected to the league, maybe a guy like Devon Achane, I think that's really going to mess with him because I think he's a little bit tight and he's not fast enough to get to those outside runners. But I think he's an overall good run fitter from like a start of the play standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah, he doesn't there's a reason why he's a day two guy. As you don't have some of those top end elite traits that are going to put you in a category where you can go out and make a play that really no one else can on the field. But again, just a fundamentally sound football player. The only other knock that I'll kind of add to is the guy's 25 years old. So kind of his ceiling, he's already there where we talk about a Schlesinger just a little bit ago. He's a little bit younger, has time to put on a little bit more weight. He's kind of a finished product. He's 6'1", 235, will probably stay around that size. And that's a good size to play at a linebacker. So I'm not really
Mhm.
concerned about that. It's more just what you're seeing at the college level is what you're probably going to see at the next level. And then another thing, and this is something we'll probably touch on with a prospect if we have enough time to get to, is his production from 2023 to 2024 did drop. He did change schools, so maybe his role in those defenses kind of changed a little bit. But that is something to kind of monitor. Is this a guy that can continue to kind of build off of 2023 rather than kind of this downward trajectory from 2024?
For sure. And you got to think too, he went to South Carolina, which was loaded with talent, right? So he probably didn't have to do as much. He could rely on his teammates a bit more. So I think understandable to see tackles and stuff go down from there. My only other day two linebacker that I thought highly of would be Smile Munden from Georgia. And he's a bit of an interesting case. He played kind of like big nickel for them a lot. Like he would cover the slot receiver from the linebacker spot, which is something you don't see a ton of over the past couple of years. I've only seen a couple of linebackers that do that. Jojo Doman from Nebraska comes to mind from, I think that was 2022. But I think Munden, if you want to talk about coverage linebackers, he's your guy. Good at diagnosing plays. Like he slips through and fights screens really, really well. I think he has like upside as a blitzer, but he's going to be lined out wider primarily. So might take a while to get there. Good tackler. I think he's fine in pursuit. And again, the coverage aspect of his game, his ability to cover large portions of the field and stay with shiftier slot receivers, that's going to be the selling point for him, and why I think he'll go probably top 100, maybe sneaks into like 120 as his floor. But I don't think he's necessarily the best run fitter, or like I think he lacks the ideal strength you want from the position too. But if coverage is something you need from your second level, I think this is somebody to target.
I think there's some things that I like about Monson's game, and it's hard to tell because you just brought up this point with Knight. You're playing with a lot of other future
Mhm.
NFL players on Georgia. They're running around making plays just as much as you are. His havoc rate, this guy generated 10 havoc plays in his final collegiate season. Some of the guys that we're talking about already, Schlesinger, he had 19. What we've talked about with Jahad Campbell, he had 22. Jalen Walker, he had 19 and a half this past year. Some of these guys had a little bit more production, a little bit more impact on the field. And that's my big concern with him. He's undersized at 225 pounds, very similar to Schlesinger. Yes, is he great in coverage? That's awesome to see. But I don't think he's the run that we saw with Demetrius Knight, Carson Swessinger, like the two guys we talked prior. And I think that's the big knock on him. And top of him also dealing with some foot injuries. So if this is a undersized guy with an injury history, it does make me concerned at the next level. And again, it just goes back to the same exact point I just made a couple of minutes ago. He's got to put on like 10 more pounds. Like you cannot get bullied and pushed around at the next level. Otherwise, offenses are just going to run right at you and you're going to become the liability of that group.
For sure. I think it's safe to say that he's kind of like a safety linebacker hybrid kind of player. I think the havoc rate matches up, right? He's in coverage a majority of the game, so he's not going to have as big an impact in the run game.
That includes passes defended, interceptions. We're just not seeing that impact on the back end either, and that's why I'm using.
Then your criticism is like really fair, I think, with that point, and probably could see a guy with a lack of high-end production make it out of day two. But I when I'm looking at the linebacker class, because we talked about how this might not match up with other classes in the past, it's really those 5 guys we talked about that have me excited. Other than that, not a ton there for me. Like Campbell Walker,
Barrett Carter out of Clemson?
From Clemson. I think I had him early day 3. I think good closing speed, B gap blitzer, good vision. He like in the short and intermediate area can work with tight ends and diagnoses the run. But I thought had tackling or struggled with tackles, a lot of arm tackles, which for a linebacker to me is the cardinal sin. If any position should know how to tackle, it's the linebacker, because they're not the first gap against the run because that's your D line, but the run game is schemed up so to like move D line out of the way and make way for the linebacker. And if you can't properly wrap up as a linebacker, especially on a premier defense over the past, not premier in terms of they aren't who they used to be with Clemson's defense, but still a top ACC defense over the past couple of years, I think that's a bit of a concern to me. But I really like the Texas tape from him, and I think he can go early day 3. It's like in your rotation year 1 with upside as a starter, maybe toward the end of his rookie deal.
Okay. I like that. The notes I had on him, I definitely was a coverage linebacker. I like that he was above 230 on the weight standpoint. Biggest knock, he allowed 5 touchdowns this past year in coverage, with coverage kind of being his selling point. Can get beat by bigger tight ends, bigger receivers. That's something to kind of be concerned about, like point of catch. But I think he's a guy that can make an impact. Again, the graph for any of those who are watching on YouTube, he's creating havoc at a similar rate to a guy like Chris Paul out of Ole Miss or Carson Swessinger, who we've talked about, while being that undersized guy. So it's like, okay, can you put on a little bit more weight and still be this disruptive? For me, it's just, I'm a little bit more higher on, okay, you are a productive athlete at the college level. You aren't this super senior guy. You're somebody who's produced at the collegiate level. I think that can transfer. And these are just some of the traits that we're trying to pick up as analysts and see, okay, what sticks when you throw it at the wall? And for me, that production, I think, really does stay with you as you continue to develop and get to each stage and level.
Yeah, certainly with the younger prospects, right? I think if you have the thresholds for your like size, speed, that like your athleticism, I think you can be molded and fit into a role once you're added to a team. And that certainly lends Barrett Carter to being a more enticing prospect than a guy like Knight, for example. I just like the physicality that Knight brings. When I'm looking at linebackers, I might be stuck in the past. Like I want like a thick neck linebacker that can stare down and fit the run. But also we've come to the future where we don't have 3 interior linebackers anymore, right? It's usually going to be 2 with somebody on the edge or an extra safety or DB. So you need that lateral speed. You need to be able to cover in the short and intermediate area. And that's why Jahad Campbell stands alone at the top. That's why a guy like Jalen Walker has the potential to be at the top there as well. And then I'm glad you mentioned Chris Paul, because I think he was 6 or 7 on my linebacker list. No relation to the NBA's Chris Paul, but I think he can be productive as well. I think he's a little bit older too. Had a couple years at Arkansas before coming to Ole Miss. But yeah, as a whole, not super excited about the linebacker class, but the Panthers still need linebackers. We have only 3 on the roster. I think as of right now. There might be some back end guys that I'm missing, right? Because
Well, we signed Christian
we set
Roseboom, so that's
Roseboom.
something, right?
Well, he started for I think the back half of the season with the Rams. Didn't shine from anything that I've read. Most of the Rams' good players on defense are their young guys, so makes sense. Omar Spates was like the breakout at linebacker for the Rams. So just getting another body in there who he might have familiarity with Ajira Vera when Evero was with the Rams. I'm not sure, but similar system perhaps. Just a body. We need bodies at the linebacker spot, especially with Shaq Thompson leaving, especially with uncertainty of how Trevin Wallace is going to improve. Trevin Wallace also had shoulder surgery at the end of the season, I believe. And we talked at the start about how Jihad Campbell's shoulder surgery might push him back in his offseason program. Could see the same with Wallace. So I'm glad that we signed somebody else, but I still think we need more at that linebacker position.
Absolutely. And the free agency market, like we touched on very briefly at the top, you guys had guys like Zach Bond. Obviously, what we talked about with Ernest Jones staying put, Tyler Dodson with the Miami Dolphins, he stayed put. Nick Bolton with the Chiefs stays put. And so all of a sudden, okay, so what teams were able to grab a guy? Patriots able to go out and sign Robert Spillane. That's probably the biggest free agency splash. EJ Speed from the Colts. He signs with the Texans, creating a huge hole for Indianapolis. So are they a landing spot for Jihad Campbell in the middle of the first round? And then you start looking at just kind of the rest of the landscape. The only team in free agency that really built that group through that medium is the Miami Dolphins. They signed KJ Britt. They obviously, like I said, re-signed Tyler Dodson. And then this is a team that brought in Willie Gay from the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think they are looking to kind of throw out this front, being in the middle of the teens with probably a couple edge rushers falling their way, are either going to go that direction or they're going to go offensive tackle with the recent retirement of Teron Armstead. So that's just a pick to monitor. Really just to highlight the linebacker free agency class. The only guys out there that I think would drive any excitement is Kazira White got cut by the Cardinals. It would be very interesting to see him go from Gannon's system to Evero's system. I don't know if that's any connection there. Devondre Campbell kind of gave up on his team last year, so I don't even know if he's going to be in the NFL next year. There really isn't anybody out there. And so you really, if you're going to address this position, going to have to find a gem in free agency, this just no-name guy, or do the same in the draft. And I just don't think with all the other holes on the team, you can really go like, hey, we'll throw a first-round pick at it. This is like a second, third, and then maybe a day 3 pick as well to try to reinvigorate that group with Trevon Wallace and Josie Jewell and really try to get some life in there beyond those two.
Yeah, and I think the depth of that position is the main issue for me, especially when we're looking at last year where we have linebacker 7 and 8 starting, I think the last 2 games of the season. So certainly need to address that position throughout the draft. Getting into perfect take territory, I really couldn't think of one in regards to our linebacker crop in the draft this season. So this is going to be my first cop out with the player evals that we've done since draft season officially started for us. I wanted to say Jihad Campbell would fall out of the first round, but I still think he'll have his suitors on April 24th, I think is the first day of the draft. So I'm going to say that the Panthers are going to select at least 4 of the players that they've either hosted a 30 visit for or had an extensive combine / all-star game visit with. Like we've had 20 reported 30 visits already, which is already up from last year. I think we only had 17 or 18 last year. Some of the guys that we brought in, Ted McMillan, could be in play at 8 or a trade back. Jalen Noel, the receiver from Iowa State, could be in play in that second round. You talked about Walter Nolan, who I like a lot more than consensus. He's top 5 on my board. Shamar Stewart, Donovan Azarakow, who we'll talk about on Thursday. A lot of edge rushers. They brought in 6 edge rushers for 30 visits. So I think we're going to take some of that group, and these aren't just first-round picks. They have day 2 and day 3 as well. Some of that group, and then when they draft like the round 5 and 6 guys, we'll find out, just like we did with Shaw Smith-Wade, that they were met with him heavy at the Senior Bowl. Like maybe we'll get Jack Besh, the Senior Bowl standout receiver from TCU. Maybe that's somebody that they hone in on. But at least 4 of the picks, and we have 9 right now, are going to be heavily connected to who the Panthers have invested time and resources into meeting in this draft cycle.
Okay. I it's hard to argue with this.
Yeah, like
This isn't.
I
These
couldn't
aren't
think of a
hot takes. These
linebacker,
are
so I had
perfect
to.
takes.
I had
No,
like
no, no.
I feel bad
I
about
get it.
this one. Yeah,
and it's fine. They say that hey, out of the picks that we have, we could be moving some to move up and grab a player, which would limit that. That
I'll
you're
go
going
to I'll
take
go to
guys.
5. I'll go to 5, so it's
Oh,
over
okay,
half. So
okay.
it's over half
There
of
we
our
go.
current pick pool.
And I think that's fair. I think when you look at the research, and I recommend you guys follow at Panthers analyst Edgar Salamingo. He does a good job breaking this down on an Excel spreadsheet of all the visits, where they could potentially fall pick wise. And I agree with that. I think a guy like Mikael Williams or Jalen Walker, who I don't know if they were official 30 visits or local visits with Georgia.
Pro Day. They had a big contingent at Georgia's Pro Day.
And with those connections there, are we counting? So, for instance, I'm just throwing a hypothetical with your perfect take. If Mikael Williams does not have a 30 visit, but with that pro day, are you counting that as a visit, or how are we?
I won't count it because unless there's like a report, for example, Matthew Golden at the Combine had an extensive meeting with the Panthers, but we haven't officially hosted him for a 30. So that would count. But they have people going to every pro day, right? So I would feel kind of bad about it's like, oh, they took the guy from the Canadian college from his pro day yesterday because they were at that one. They were one of the 5 teams looking at that tackle. But yeah, so it would have to be a reported like 30 visit. Maybe they bring these guys in on secret 30 visits. Who knows? But reported 30/local visit or like heavy interest at one of the All-Star events. Jalen Walker would count because he's from Salisbury and had a local visit here with the Panthers. So I would count that one. But until we know if Mikael Williams was in the building, I can't count it.
Sounds good. Perfect. So we drew the line there. We will rehash a lot of these takes shortly after the draft. I think we're going to have to tally them up.
Yeah,
and
we'll stack them up.
How we did. You kicked my ass, that put it lightly, on the 2024 season. So hopefully we can right the ship here in 2025. My take for this week's episode, or Tuesday's episode, there are gaping holes for both the Raiders and the Colts at the linebacker position.
Yeah.
6 for the Raiders is probably too rich to take a linebacker. They may take a cornerback. They have a lot of issues on the back 7, so to speak, for that unit. So they have a lot of work to do there. And I think the Colts as well. I talked about EJ Speed kind of hitting free agency. They pick 14, depending on how they feel about Jahad Campbell's injury. Again, this is a team that took Leitu Latu, who had a lot of concerning medicals last year. So this isn't a team that hasn't necessarily been scared off for there. I think out of those 2 teams, out of the guys that we talked about that are probably going to go within the first 75 picks. So we talked about 5 linebackers, Jahad Campbell. I'm not going to include Jalen Walker on this list just because I think he will be drafted to fit as an edge, or his comp's a little bit weirder. We wanted to talk about him today because he did fit the off-ball linebacker, did play that at the college level. But I'm talking about guys like Carson Schlesinger, Demetrius Knight, Samuel Mondon, and Barrett Carter. I think out of those guys, they take one of them, both the Raiders and the Colts. So I'm double dipping here. I'm not just going with one team or the other. These are teams with glaring holes at the linebacker position, and I think it is in their best interest to take one of these guys in the first 75 picks, and then on day 3 probably take another guy or 2 more to fill out that roster.
I like it. I could definitely see it. Bringing up the Leitu Latu point, I hadn't thought about that, but they have their same regime there, right? Chris Ballard's still the GM. Steichen.
And look at what they did on the secondary. So it's really the only hole. A lot of people have the Loveland or Jahad Campbell because it's really the only hole.
Yeah, I think I had Tyler Warren making it there in my last one. I think I would like that as well because they still need production from the tight end spot. But linebacker, looking at their depth chart is certainly a need for them. And I think the Raiders more so. The Raiders might have 2 or 3 linebackers. We'll have to see. But I'm glad we did talk a little bit about Jalen Walker because it's going to lead into the Edge Rushers episode that we'll have on Thursday. And that one might be an hour and a half one just by how many good edge rushers there are at the top of this class. We're going to have so much to talk about. So stay tuned for Thursday's episode. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. Like I said, on Thursday, we'll be back. Another long episode. So stay tuned for that and keep pounding.